Hello, my name is Macy Fons. I'm a horticulture agent for the Mason County Cooperative Extension Service. Today we're starting our series with container gardening and healthy eating. And I will be covering the container garden portion, and Anita will be covering the healthy eating portion. So today we're going to start off with just some basics about container gardening. And the first thing we're going to look at is, what do you need to get started? So you can see here that I do have a container, and it has sides on it. I have a couple other tools here. So first off, you want to look for a container. Now, this container is a rectangular container. It has handles. It's fabric, so it allows the water to flow out. And I bought this online, but you don't necessarily have to go and purchase a container. What you want to focus on is, you can look for something that maybe is reusable. Maybe you had an aluminum pan, or you had an old milk jug, or you had a container that was used for something, another garden at another time. You can use other containers. The main thing you want to focus on is that you can put holes into it to allow the water to flow out. Before you put the soil in, you do want to make sure to sanitize those items, and you can use 9 parts water to 1 part bleach, and then just make sure to rinse that well. But that's going to allow for those items to be sanitized. Next, you're going to need some soil. And within the soil, there is a couple components. So you don't want to just go to your back of your yard and grab some soil. What you need is a container gardening mix. So this mix contains perlite, and it looks like these little white balls. And then it also has peat moss, which peat moss is, it looks kind of stringy, but it allows for some of the water to stay within the soil. And then also you have these little green balls, and that's going to be fertilizer. So some of the container gardening mixes contain fertilizer, some of them don't. That's something that you need to know, so that hey, I need to put fertilizer on, or I have this mixture and it's going to be sustainable for 6 months or 9 months. You also need something to water, and you don't necessarily have to have a watering can. There's a couple things to focus on. A watering can is nice. It's something I would suggest because it does have the head on it, and it allows for you to water, and the water will flow out and make a more even distribution. If you just dump water onto it, sometimes the seeds can be pushed down into the soil and they won't germinate because they're too deep. If you don't want to buy a watering jug, especially with container gardens, you might get a milk jug and poke holes on the top of it, and that way you can just water that way. And it's just a cheaper option. Also, gloves is an option. You can purchase any type of glove. I like the ones with the plastic bottoms because they don't get wet. With any garden, you're going to have to purchase seed, but you want to look on the back of the seed packet. You want to look and see, does this crop grow well in my area? What is the space that I need to plant, the depth, and the days of germination? And the back of the seed packet is going to tell you everything that you need to know. Today we're going to focus on peas. Now, peas are considered a cool season legume, so they can grow in the early spring, and they can also grow in fall. So with any container garden, we want to utilize as much garden space as we can, because this is all the garden that we have. So we want to make sure to plant as much as we can during the right seasons. So we can have this container and potentially use the container in the early spring. We could look at it maybe a summer crop and also a late fall crop as well. So we can try to get as much produce as we can because we don't have a lot of space with container gardening. There are several different types of peas, and a pea is just not a pea. Snap peas, and they're a cross between a snow pea and a garden pea. You can eat the entire pod, and they have a very sweet flavor. A garden pea is also considered a shell pea, and sometimes it's called an English pea. They are basically shelled out, and you eat the inside, or the little pea itself. And the peas are sweet, and they can be eaten raw or cooked. Snow peas are also called Chinese peas, and they are often used in stir fries. They are flat and very small peas inside, and you can consume the whole pod. And but they do have a string on them, and that string can become very tough. And then lastly, we have the southern peas, and those are also considered cowpeas. These are different than snap, shelled, or snow. It's actually a warm season crop, and it can be planted and grown like beans. You do want to make sure that whenever you're placing your containers that they receive a good amount of sunlight. So, you want to look at an area that probably receives at least 8 hours of sunlight, and you want to make sure it's not too hot. So for example, if I own a brick home and I put my container against the brick home, then that brick home is going to heat up as the day goes on, and then the area that it's laid up against is going to heat up as well. So your whole container might be extremely hot. So you might want to consider another area. Also, if you place them on concrete, the concrete can actually be like a wick, and it can suck some of that water out, and you're going to have to water more often. When preparing to plant, look on the back of the seed packet again. It's going to tell you when, where, and how to plant. So you're going to look at the back of the seed packet. It's going to tell you to plant 1 to 2 seeds every 2 inches. So if you plant 2 seeds and both of them germinate, you need to cut one of those back because it's probably going to be overcrowded. And this is typically suggested, especially if you have older seed, and you can go ahead and plant 2 of those in every 2 inches. So make sure that you cover those seeds up well, and that you make sure that to keep the area watered. Watering with containers is a little bit different than your average garden. You have to go out and actually fill the soil. So I can't tell you to go plant your crops and then water every other day, because especially during the spring, we might have rain or it's going to be cooler. So you need to go in and actually fill the soil. And if it feels damp or feels like it has some moisture in it, probably chances are you don't need to water it. And you're not going to have to water a spring garden near as much as a summer garden. Peas might need trellised, and we don't have to have something expensive. You can use something that you already have, for example, a tomato cage. So if you notice that your peas are growing and they're starting to kind of fall over, or they're looking for a trellis, you can place the tomato cage within the container, and then you can actually train them to go up the trellis. And you can use a couple of these within your container. You can use wooden sticks. It doesn't have to be something elaborate. It can be something that you make, but it does allow for the peas to grow up on the trellis itself instead of laying over and making it more difficult to water. With any garden, there are disease factors to consider. And within a container garden, you have to water a lot. And water can be one of those things that it's a good thing because your plant needs it, but also if you do not water properly, it can encourage diseases. So whenever we are planting and our plants are growing and we're watering, we want to make sure to water as close to the soil as we can. So if your peas start to grow and they're 4 or 5 inches tall, then we don't want to bring our water on top and go over top of the leaves themselves. You want to go as low as you can to the soil. You don't want to hit the leaves. If the water splashes off the soil, it can get onto the plant. If it gets onto the plant, then the plant becomes dirty, and the soil itself can contain diseases in it, and it can create a factor for the plant that can make it dirty and make it harder for it to grow and can inhibit disease itself. Also, there are specific diseases such as powdery mildew. Powdery mildew, it might have a white substance on top of the leaves. It looks like baby powder. And typically with any disease, there are fungicides, but with container gardens, we have such a small area that sometimes it's not worth the money to go out and purchase these fungicides. Typically, you just want to make sure to follow the back of the instructions of the seed packet. Plant the depth and how far apart it tells you to plant. Also with peas, you might need the trellis so that the plant can grow upward and you can have more airflow. Also, you can have dampening off. So dampening off looks like the very bottom of the stalk or the very bottom of the stem itself can start to rot, and you might be overwatering the plant itself. Also, there's a couple more diseases. There's bacterial blight and anthracnose. So these diseases can look like brown spots on the leaves or on the beans themselves. And on that pea pod, it can look like little brown specks all over it. And this disease can occur. But once diseases come up on the plant, usually fungicides are more of a preventative, and they do not help once the plant is already infected. So typically we want to look at proper watering. You want to make sure to not harvest when it's wet. And also if any plants die out or the leaves are on the soil, make sure to remove those. Just make sure to keep the pots themselves very clean. Diseases can be extremely hard to tell exactly what's going on. Is it a disease? Is it an insect problem? Am I watering enough or am I not watering enough? There's so many questions when it comes to what is wrong with my plant. So look within the information that is provided. We do have publications on diseases, and you can look to see, does this disease look like this picture? Or does it look like an insect problem? Or, am I watering enough? So there's a number of factors to consider, but you can always contact your local extension office. We can come out and take a look or help you diagnose what is exactly going on with your plant. Insects can also be an issue, just like with any other type of garden. And typical insects for earlier gardens might be aphids. So they're a very small insect. Typically they live on the underside of the leaf, and they can be a green or a reddish color. They're very, very small, smaller than a tick. So, and they can be hard to detect. So always go out and scout. You can turn the leaves over, see if there's any insects, and then determine, hey, I have an insect problem. What should I do next? And aphids are a little bit harder to kill. There are some insecticides that can help, but insects, typically you can take an insect and basically kill it yourself. Just pinch it and kill it. But aphids are harder because they're a lot smaller. So if you need help with aphid control, you can again contact your local extension office. There are some other insects that can be a nuisance to your garden. And we can provide everyone there's a booklet that we have available, and it has pictures and definitions of what each one of these insects are. So if you go out and you see that you have an insect, you can flip and see if the picture matches, and it tells you if it's a beneficial insect or if it's a pest. So there are some insects that we do not want to kill. Some of these insects that are considered beneficial can actually help. So they might kill insects that are not beneficial, that are actually considered pests. So make sure that you go through the guide and you can read here on the back of each one of these to determine if it's beneficial or if it is a pest. Typically, again, with your container gardening, if you do see a pest, you can pinch it off, you can kill it yourself instead of buying insecticides that might cost more than what you're wanting to spend. When you're ready to harvest, you can look at the number of days that you have planted the seeds. So on the back of your seed packet, it will tell you the number of days to harvest. And that's just a rough estimate. But with peas and the peas that we're going to provide, it typically takes about 56 days. And when you're ready to harvest, you can go out and pick those peas. You do want to make sure to not just pull on them. You can get a pair of scissors or pruners and you can cut them off. And that way you're not pulling the entire plant down. You can also just, take one hand and another and pull on it, but do be careful because as your peas grow, they might not all be ready at the same exact time. So you want to make sure not to disturb the entire plant. When you're looking at your harvest, it's about 20 pounds of peas per 100 foot. And then you want to harvest about every other day. You don't want to take everything unless it's ready. So you might go out and harvest a few peas, and then a couple days later, there might be more ready. Peas can be stored in the refrigerator, but they can also be frozen. So if you have any questions about peas, you can stop by the extension office. We'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Now, Anita Boyd is going to go over a recipe with you that involves peas. So hopefully, once your peas grow, you can actually use the peas within a recipe. Thank you.
Hi, I hope you're enjoying the container garden and healthy eating class so far. And you've learned about peas today, so we're going to be cooking with peas. And we're going to make a recipe called couscous with peas and onions. And I picked this recipe because it sounded good for one thing. It's a side dish with peas, but not just peas alone. And it has couscous in it. And a lot of people have never heard of couscous, which is another grain. And this is pearl couscous. And you can find it in the aisle with rice. So the first thing, well, let me tell you what we need. We need a cup of couscous, a cup of onion finely chopped, a cup of frozen peas thawed, a half a teaspoon of sage and a half a teaspoon of salt, and 1 teaspoon of olive oil and 1 1/3 cups of water. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put a teaspoon of olive oil in our skillet, and we're going to saute our onions. Until they are just a little brown. So I'm going to spread this oil around in here. I'm going to let it heat up just a little bit, and then I'm going to add our onion. Okay, our onions are brown, and now we're going to add our peas. Couscous. Our water. Our sage. And salt. So we'll stir this all up together. And I'm going to show it to you first. Can you see that? And then I'm going to cover it and just let it simmer and cook until the peas are tender but still bright green and all the water is gone. Then after that, we're going to fluff it with a fork and taste it. Okay, so it cooked for about 5 minutes, I meant to tell you that, on low, and this is what it looks like. So I'm just going to try a little bit. I like everything that's in here. I love sage, and I like peas, so let's see. It's really good. I'm trying to think. It tastes like something I've had before, but I can't remember what that is. But it is really good. I think you're going to like it. Give it a try. Bye.